is Ed Griffin, and I wanted to make a video on the subject of Guillain Barre syndrome. It's a disease that I contracted 15 years ago, and while I have seen on YouTube some sort of testimonials about people who had had it recently, I thought maybe I could give a little bit of a perspective for those who have had it and still are battling some of the aftermath, and a sort of education for people who don't know anything about it. And I'll try and be concise with my comments. Again, my name is Ed, and I was actually on a business trip to Las Vegas when I began to feel lightheaded back in July of 1995. And I started to feel this sort of tingling in my toe initially. And then it kind of worked up and I felt it in the left side of my face. And I began to feel a little bit in my hands. I was trying to dismiss it like most people who I've heard speak of the disease. But by the time I got to Vegas, flew over there, I couldn't really dismiss it, and I was feeling lightheaded. Went to a clinic at one of the casinos actually, and they thought that it was high blood pressure. My blood pressure was very high, and so they treated me right there with some medicine, and I left after it had come down somewhat, and with a promise that I'd come back every day. Well, it wasn't but a few hours that I really started to feel lightheaded again, and this sort of burning sensation in my extremities had started. Well, I was rushed on an emergency basis and went back to the clinic. They thought I was having a heart attack or stroke, and this is one kind of comment to just everybody. When you get a disease, if specialists or in the emergency room or whatever, there's an initial diagnosis, sometimes it takes a lot before they'll step back again and take a look at you again, because and I'm not here to criticize 15 years later. I'm happy to be as well off as I am. But they continued to test me for stroke and heart attack, and within a week I got to the point I couldn't even walk the halls. It was difficult for me to even walk to the bathroom from my hospital bed. And actually what they told my wife is, well, men when they're laying in bed, they can linger and they can kind of complain. And she had continued to point out how my muscles, which were, pretty solid muscles, fairly active, healthy, athletic guy, started to get kind of spongy, kind of soft. Well, long and the short of it is, they let me go. I went home, flew home. On the airplane, I collapsed. I was in a wheelchair onto the plane, and on a wheelchair out of the plane. And then later that night, I felt this horrible burning sensation all the way up my legs. It was as if my body had been invaded by wasps. And I wanted to get some relief from it, so I tried to stand up, but my legs at that point were useless, and I simply crashed to the ground. Eventually, I went to another emergency hospital and then found my way back to Kaiser Permanente. One plug for them, my favorite place in a medical emergency, where I'm a member. And they did take a look. They kind of thought I was having an aneurysm of the aorta, but they did a CAT scan. What they found is that I had a kidney that was completely filled with a mass. As it turned out, it was a cancerous tumor. And so that's why my blood pressure kept going up and down. But they also then saw this weakness, my inability to talk out of the left side of my face. It was sort of a Bell's palsy kind of a thing, and the burning sensation. And so they did a lumbar puncture, as they've done to most of you who've been through it. Determined that there was, I guess, too much protein in the fluid, that this in fact was Guillain Barre syndrome. So they began treating me for that. They had to make a decision as to whether to treat the cancer, what they assumed to be cancer in the kidney, or the paralysis. Well, I guess it was determined that you have to treat the paralysis first. So I went through 5 days of plasmapheresis treatments like many of you had who contracted the disease. And then once that was finished, 2 days later, I could move my arms, up my shoulders. I still could breathe at that point, but everything else was pretty much gone, and I was on fire constantly. I was taking Demerol and sleeping pills and, you know, the whole battery of painkillers, things to keep me quiet. Then they operated on me. They said they couldn't wait for another month or so. I guess they felt that it was going to spread to other parts of my urinary tract. So I went in and had my kidney removed 2 days after the plasmapheresis, and then at that point, then I couldn't breathe when I woke up from surgery. But the good news is all the cancer was removed. It would have been very difficult to undergo chemo and radiation on top of everything else, so I was very, very lucky. There's a complete spiritual side of this whole saga, because those of you who've had it know what it's like to live every minute, every hour, to those excruciating nights when you can't sleep, or after the sleeping pills wear off and the fire that burns in you, just, you know, it's just really tough. And a minute can be a century. There's just some sad and lonely times, but you know, you keep looking for silver lining and eventually some happy ending to all this. Well, the happy ending is that they took the kidney out, the cancer was gone. I then contracted pneumonia, so I was in the hospital about a month and a half total. Then went to a convalescent home, and I got tons of stories about that, but fortunately I didn't have to stay there but a couple of weeks, I believe it was. They thought it'd be a couple of months, but any of you want to contact me, I can tell you the long and the short of it is you can't push yourself too hard, or you can relapse with this disease. But I knew that Beatle music, the Rolling Stones, and a home environment would be better, so put a hospital bed in my house, and you know, everything that I needed, and so did most of my physical therapy and occupational therapy in that transition at home instead of a convalescent center. It's a lot better for your head. So there's so many, again, sub-stories I can tell, some humorous. I mean, there's some very humorous ones as well as some fairly painful ones, and I can talk about each juncture along the way. But I really wanted to give you a sense of what it's like now to be 15 years later, 15 years older. I'm now 59. What it's like now. I box. I don't take the punches, but I hit the bags and whatnot. I bowl. I can slide 5 feet forward. I can do things. A little bit overweight, as you can see. I still maintain some activity, and I can walk. I rather swim and sometimes yoga. Combination of those things that don't put a lot of pressure on the feet. My feet, my hands, and the left side of my face are where the peripheral neuropathy, or the myelin sheath that gets damaged or destroyed, that surrounds all of our nerves. It's like a rubber wire around an electrical wire. Well, if the rubber's gone, that's essentially what people who have peripheral neuropathy as a result of diabetes or Guillain Barre. So it burns all the time, and it's permanent damage. I assume one day stem cell research will find an answer, but it hasn't yet. So you take, you know, one takes gabapentin, by another named Neurontin. I'm kind of at the maximum dosage, I think, about 3,600 milligrams. I take another pill called nortriptyline at night, kind of tweaks down the nerve sensation. And then in between, if I'm overly stressed or tired, or if I push a little too hard on the surface, you can